sex workers, men who have sex with men, and the issues of stigma and discrimination are still quite real.
Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo are overwhelmed as more cases of cholera continue to be recorded in South Kivu. Doctors Without Borders has treated at least 600 patients. Over 350 of them have been taken to hospital. Authorities in South Kivu say over 5,000 cases and 28 deaths have been reported. Cholera is a bacterial infection caused by consuming contaminated water or food. Kailiche Kumalo reports.
Aid workers and health officials have warned of recurring outbreaks without proper sanitation, clean water, and long-term healthcare investment. The World Health Organization cases and 14 deaths in 1 month. This has raised concerns about similar trends in South Kivu. Despite the outbreak, miners have persisted in their search for gold under harsh and unsanitary conditions.
Lastly, the Trump administration has this week pressed 5 African presidents to take in migrants from other countries when they are deported by the U.S. The plan was presented to the presidents of Liberia, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania and Gabon during their visit to the White House. It was not immediately clear if any of the countries had agreed to the plan. Since returning to office in January, U.S. President Donald Trump has been pressing to speed up deportations, including by sending migrants to third countries where there are problems or delays over sending them to their home nations. Now, recapping on your top stories, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will brief the nation this coming Sunday on developments arising from statements made by the KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner, Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Channel Africa News, I am Onele Ntsinzi.
SABC News, the African perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Spanish court has handed Brazil coach Carlo Ancelotti a 1-year prison sentence for failing to pay tax on his image rights revenues in 2014, while Tottenham Hotspur have agreed a $75 million fee with West Ham to sign midfielder Mohamed Kudus. Details of these and other stories coming up at 4:30.
Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It is exactly 8 minutes after 4 p.m. A very good afternoon to you, Africa. Welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa. A lot in store for you this afternoon. We'll be having our usual Thursday feature on the G20 with Ashraf Garda on the National Pulse on SAFM. And the focus today is the Africa Blockchain Report. We'll be looking at some of the standout trends and insights revealed in this report and how the G20 is looking at regulating and focusing on the risks associated with the crypto assets and the financial stability of these assets. Policy implementation roadmaps are also very key in this journey. Also coming up today, a look at the BRICS STEM. South African Parliament delivered its 2025 budget vote for science and innovation yesterday. We'll focus on this with the youth-led science and the country's global tech ambitions. It's gone exactly 9 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Hawa wa Afrika Kusini wenye asili ya kizungu ambao wamepewa ukimbizi huko nchini Marekani. Je, nini chanzo cha wao kuomba ukimbizi nchini Marekani?
Wenyewe hawajaomba ukimbizi. Kuna shirika fulani inaitwa AfriForum, shirika mbili za wazungu ambao wanatetea haki ya wazungu hapa, AfriForum na Solidarity. Hao walienda Marekani kufanya kampeni kusema kwamba wazungu wananyanyaswa hapa Afrika Kusini, na walivyofanya hiyo kampeni nyanyaswa.
Kuna namna ya wao kwamba wamepoteza uraia wa Afrika Kusini, na je, endapo Trump akamaliza muda wake madarakani, uhalali wao wa kuishi nchini Marekani ukoje?
Itakuwa vigumu, kifupi itakuwa vigumu wenyewe kupoteza uraia wao.
Darubini ya Afrika 11 kamili hadi 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
bringing the African markets into your home. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It's gone exactly 10 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. We begin here this afternoon. The U.S. President Donald Trump is hosting 5 leaders from West Africa. This as the White House seeks to strengthen economic ties with the mineral-rich region while fostering trade to counter the growing regional influence of both Russia and China. During a meeting with the leaders of Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania and Senegal, Trump indicated that his administration is committed to strengthening the U.S.'s friendships in Africa through economic development efforts that benefit both the United States and its partners. For more on this, we joined on the line by Dennis O'Shea, a certified financial modeling and valuation analyst and geopolitics content curator. A very good afternoon to you, Dennis. Good to have you with us on Africa in Business. Welcome.
Hi, Timmy. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
It's great. I mean, one thing that is for certain, and this is something that Trump has said, that he's shifting his focus and he's shifting his relationship with Africa from aid to trade. Is this something that was expected? And how can these West African economies make the most of these trade-based engagements? Can they win?
Yes. That's a very, very strong geopolitical question because the answer to that is going to be very geopolitical. You must remember that the United States doesn't just make moves, they make strategic moves. And this is a major strategic move because a lot of the African observers are saying that while leaving out the big African nations like Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and you're talking to the smaller ones, but you can see from that it's a strategy that the United States is trying to communicate across and say we can do without the big nations and we can do with the smaller ones. And you see many of those nations with a combined GDP of just $10 billion or more. It shows that the U.S. is up to something, and we'll continue to see what the U.S. is up to. I believe they're going to win because observing the tone of the communication of the meeting that they had yesterday, the leaders were relaxed, they were calm, they were communicating and engaging in meaningful conversations, trade communications with President Trump. I listened to the president of Senegal. He was proposing a golf course and investment in tourism. I also listened to the president of Gabon, who is looking for investments. Each of them also looking at situations where meaningful investments can come to boost the economy of their different nations.
If we look, Dennis, at what is common with all of these countries, not only are they all in West Africa, but they're all mineral-rich countries. All of them have, manganese, which is a key mineral in the production of stainless steel, as well as batteries. They've got iron ore, gold, diamonds, lithium, cobalt. How can they leverage these natural resources to meaningfully shift the U.S.-Africa trade balances in Africa's favor? As you mentioned, the United States is very strategic in their move. Could Africa once again end up with the shorter end of the stick here? Are we as a continent going in there with the muscle to be able to meaningfully negotiate a beneficially and a mutually beneficial trade agreement?
Well, one of the first comments made by one of the speakers, the 5 leaders were seated down facing President Trump and his cabinet and try to reach in resources. That resonated with President Trump. I saw his expression, and that is just the reality of the situation, like what you said now. So much resources, but the question to Africans is, do we have those strategic leaders or strategic advisors that can project into the near term and the long term to be able to take advantage of such situations? This is a huge opportunity for those nations, especially the 5 of them. They can transform their nations. They don't have the burden of overpopulation like many of the big economies in Africa. They don't have too much debt burden on them. Several of them, I checked them up, no so much debt burden from either the World Bank or the IMF. So they are in a pretty good position to transform their nations. They just need those strategic leaders that will know their story before getting on that table.
So
and I believe
Dennis.
from the
Yes,
Yes.
so important, Dennis. We'll have to leave it at that for this afternoon. But certainly this is not the last time we'll be talking about this. We'll also talk post the meeting and see what it is that came out of that. Dennis O'Shea, thank you so much for your insight this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Tammy.
Thank you. That's Dennis O'Shea, Certified Financial Modeling and Valuation Analyst and Geopolitics Content Curator. It takes us to exactly 16 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. In just a moment, our weekly G20 feature.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa and SAFM, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
Now, APSA's Blockchain Report 2025, blockchain's multifaceted role in economic development, shows that blockchain technology will be key in driving inclusive, sustainable growth. However, these technologies raise questions about the risks associated with crypto assets. And this is what we're focusing on this afternoon on our G20 feature. A very good afternoon to you, Ashraf Garda.
Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, like the collaboration between SFM and Channel Africa as we count down to G20 and we pick up some of the most important issues that certainly the G20, those in leadership would have to cover in the next few months. Now, one of them, and you've touched on the blockchain report. So what about the vulnerabilities around crypto assets? So there's a plus, but are there minuses too? Now, the G20 is working closely with the Financial Stability Board, which is the FSB, to finalize a crypto asset policy implementation roadmap. It sounds very confusing, and maybe it is. The question is, do we have a crypto policy roadmap even in South Africa? But this is globally as well. So they're trying to do that would seek to promote coordinated policy and regulatory responses.
You speak, Asha, about confusion, and I think many are still very much a bit in the dark as far as cryptocurrency is concerned, crypto assets and blockchain technology. But we have just the man to help us unpack all of this. So what they are, how they've been treated, when they've enjoyed the bullish markets, and to unpack the pros and the cons associated with the crypto assets this afternoon, we're joined by Ngaiseng Oratile Ralipedi, Digital Product Manager, Stablecoin at APSA Corporate and Investment Banking. A very good afternoon to you, Ngaiseng. Good to have you with us this afternoon. So when you look at the Africa Blockchain Report, what would you highlight perhaps as some of the standout trends and the insights revealed in this report? And why did you as APSA deem it necessary and important to put a study of this nature together? Welcome. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Tammy, for inviting me. Am I audible first before I go off on a rant?
Loud and clear.
Thanks so much. So I guess there's a few things that we need to take away from what we've observed out of the report. The first one is you're seeing record-breaking venture capital funding in relation to blockchain technology, but even when you compare it to other sectors, like other fintech sectors. So you're seeing a lot more flows that are targeted toward blockchain solutions and blockchain products. So that's the first observation from the report. The second one is, and this is really interesting for me specifically, is that you're seeing convergence between blockchain technology and AI solutions more specifically. So you're seeing a lot more companies leveraging artificial intelligence and grouping that with the underlying blockchain infrastructure to offer new services and products to underserved or underbanked communities. So we thought that was a really interesting observation as well. The other observation that we took from it is that you're seeing a lot of purpose-driven sort of innovation, but also a lot of purpose-driven sort of investments. So it isn't companies who are just looking to raise capital for the sake of raising capital. These are companies who are targeting specific issues that we're seeing across the continent in relation to financial services and bridging the inclusion element in relation to people who don't necessarily have access to those financial products. So those are some of the observations that we're seeing. And at ABSA, particularly at corporate investment banking, we're seeing that proliferation in digital assets across the board at scale in a way that's really interesting for us to look at. And so that's why we thought it was really important for us to support this particular blockchain report in focusing its particular application to these areas that we find really fascinating and interesting at ABSA CIB.
Let me come in there. It's Ashraf Gandhi here in he's saying now, of course, we can talk blockchain technology across the world, but we can bring it back to Africa in particular. So how is blockchain technology transforming this critical financial services sector just in the continent of Africa only?
So there's a lot of ways in which we're seeing this happen. So I think I mentioned it a little bit ago, Asha. So one of the ways is around credit facilities. So these are, for instance, companies who are looking at providing credit facilities to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to have that access. So that's one way in which we're doing it. The other way that is especially interesting for us at ABSA CIB is what's called tokenization. So ideally what tokenization is just making something that is offline or in sort of tangible, bringing it into the digital space. So for instance, when you're buying a stock, you need to buy the whole stock, right? So it's really difficult to buy fractionalized amounts of those stocks. And that's what tokenization really offers in a way that's really novel. So suddenly people who otherwise don't have enough capital to invest in sophisticated financial products can now buy fractions of that, and they can now suddenly have access to these products in a way they never otherwise would have been able to. And that's where the power of the technology really comes in. You're able to start now fractionalizing all of these things. So some people even take it to an extreme, right? You can fractionalize up to 79 decimal places. I doubt anyone is trying to invest up to 79 decimal places, but that's part of where the value add really is. And that's where it's really bridging those key financial infrastructure and key financial access specifically for people who otherwise wouldn't have had that access to begin with.
It really sounds incredible. It sounds like a minefield of opportunity. But like everything with opportunity, there's always the flip side of it. And I think that's one of the things that the G20 countries are grappling with right now is how do you ensure that there is, I guess, safety due to the lack of regulatory compliance in the blockchain economy. It's quite vulnerable to risks like money laundering, crypto asset, policy implementation. So how can the crypto asset policy implementation roadmap really help to curb money laundering and counter terrorism financing? Because in as much as you've highlighted all of the opportunities, there's also the flip side of that. Is there regulation enough to regulate the space?
So that's the first thing that really needs to be done at scale. There needs to be some level of regulatory harmonization that establishes what exactly the rules and guidelines that crypto companies need to abide by. At the moment, there isn't that, right? So there isn't sufficient regulations in each of our markets, specifically as ABSA, that really says, okay, this is exactly how you need to implement these solutions in a way that really protects that end user. Ultimately, it's really up to us, I guess, as a financial institution to make sure that we're in the best place as possible to do so. So that's the first one. The second one is it comes to a deepened understanding of what the technology provides. So what is really important for people to understand is, yes, it is true that there are bad actors in the technology, but what the technology offers is a level of transparency that doesn't otherwise exist, right? So you're suddenly able to start tracing and tracking those illicit funds in a way you otherwise wouldn't be able to in the traditional sort of space, right? So on chain, I can see that you paid this particular wallet at this particular time, and I don't have to rely on a counterparty to verify that information. ABSA can go and check that information firsthand, and we can extrapolate that information to really make sure that the end user is protected, but the wider countries in which we operate in are also protected. So those two things are really important, to put across. The one is we do definitely need regulatory harmonization, but the other one is we need to look at the technology and see where it is that it can take off some of those conditions around anti-money laundering or any identification of those bad actors. And that's really where the unique power of the technology actually exists.
If I can just come in there, now, we do know that amongst the countries, Japan, South Korea, India, that's 3 countries that are part of the G20 countries. They've already embraced the use of cryptocurrencies, right? But there are also, other issues around downsides, which we've touched on already, right? In terms of, balancing financial integrity without stifling innovation, it's an interesting thought about doing that, right? Are there gaps that need to be plugged?
Definitely. So we need to understand 3 specific things. So the first one is there needs to be an established amount of trust, and that comes with regulations. Ultimately, the end user can't trust a particular company unless it's licensed and regulated. So that's the first one. The other one, and you just mentioned it now, is there needs to be a really delicate balance between the innovation itself and the regulations that I just mentioned above. Like I said, unlike the other technology stacks that you otherwise would be a company to in how you make traditional payments, this particular technology allows for you to have a unique sense of transparency. So regulations need to take into account just the extent to which the technology itself already can protect the end user and the end customer. So those are some of the ways we need to look at it. And then finally, we need to reduce illicit use. That is the key part that is really important. We need to be able to be in a position where we have both the regulatory and the technology infrastructure to protect the end user. So those are really the 3 top of mind sort of aspects that need there.
All of these conversations and discussions, Ngai saying, are really leading towards the G20 summit, which is taking place in November this year. So what are some of the things that the G20 finance ministers or even their central banks should be considering and putting in the forefront as far as policy is concerned around cryptocurrency? And I guess the second part of my question is, as Africa, what should the finance ministers or the central banks be prioritizing in promoting intra-African trade and supply chain in the blockchain economy?
Thank you so much, Samir. So there's actually a few of them for them to observe. So the first one, and we've spoken about this throughout this interview, there needs to be a standardized global crypto regulations. The reason why I keep emphasizing that is that the technology is meant to be borderless by definition. So there needs to be a joint sort of effort in building out those regulatory conditions so that we can map out really where it is we can play and where we shouldn't be playing. The second one is around boosting intra-Africa trade, leveraging blockchain technology. Like I said, because it's borderless, that's why you're seeing more and more consumers use things like stablecoin to facilitate things like international payments or remittance flow, because the technology, A, is cheap and efficient to do so, but also it enables you to settle the counterparty instantaneously. And leveraging that particular technology, we need to look at where the synergies would be in boosting that intra-Africa trade. The third one is around championing financial inclusion. That's really important because of the underlying technology provides that access, right? So I gave you an example around tokenization and being able to fractionalize stocks, equities, gold, or any other product really to decimal points enough that people who don't have the capital right now to access those products can suddenly start accessing it. That's the financial inclusion sort of play. And then the other thing is around the technology stack itself, specifically around that regulatory piece. So what the technology also offers you is real-time regulatory access to the international payment instrument or any other financial product that you can extrapolate that information in real time. And then a regulator doesn't have to wait for end of day reporting or end of month reporting. They can access that information in real time. So those are some of the ways in which you can strengthen sort of that public-private innovation partnership between regulators and the private sector, right, particularly to build those products that are both innovative but also consumer protection focused.
Okay, let's leave it at that. Ngai Seng Oratile Ralepeli, thank you for your time, and of course, Tommy, as always, thanks for your connection. We'll do it again next week, in fact, as this unique collaboration between SFM Radio and Channel Africa, doing this together as in this build-up to, as you've heard, the November G20 summit. So this takes place every single Thursday around this time, 4:15 to 4:30, and I welcome your reaction to all of that. For now, let's get to the news headlines.
That's Ashraf Garda and myself, Tammy Ngubeni, there wrapping up our weekly G20 feature, thanking our guest this afternoon, Nkaiseng Oratile Raliperi, Digital Product Manager, Stablecoin at Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. He takes us to exactly 4:30 p.m. Central African Time as we head over now to the economics desk, where Chanduko Ligege is standing by with your latest market indicators.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Tommy. Good afternoon. These are your financial indicators from the African continent. $1 is trading at 17 Rand 79 in South Africa, Botswana 13 Pula 21, Namibia 17 Namibian dollars 79, Zambia 24 Kwacha 30. In Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 594, Ethiopia 134 B 488, Uganda 3,000 shilling 570, Tanzania 2,623 shilling. $1 in Nigeria is 1,000 naira 529. Egypt, the dollar is 49 Egyptian pound 60. Tunisia 2 dinar 89. Algeria 128 dinar 948. Morocco 8 dirham 97. In Angola, 912 kwanza. The Congolese franc is 2,866 to the US dollar. Looking at commodities, gold is at $3,323, platinum at $1,353 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil at $69.69 a barrel. That is all for now, and for any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And for the business of sport, a very good afternoon to you, Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Tammy. A very good afternoon from the Sports Desk. Olympique Lyonnais' relegation to League 2 was overturned by the Appeals Committee of the DNCG, the French football financial watchdog, on Wednesday. Now, the committee has imposed a framework for the wage bill as well as the transfer fees in the club's proposed 2025-2026 League 1 budget. Lyon, who were crowned the French champions 7 times from 2002 to 2008, qualified for next season's Europa League football following a 6th place finish in League 1 this past season. Now, the club was demoted by the DNCG in November of last year due to the poor state of their finances. The was also confirmed in June after a meeting between a US businessman as well as the club owner, John Textor, as well as the DNCG. So meanwhile, Eagle Football Group, the holding company behind Lyon, reported a net loss of $137.09 million for the first half of the financial year ending the 31st of December. Women's football mogul Michelle Kang, who owns Lyon's women's team, LO Lyonnais, has now been appointed the president of the Olympique Lyonnais, replacing Textor. Now, football journalist Kevai Solokol explains.
As it is now, more uncertainty, because now we have to wait for UEFA to make a decision. Obviously, they've got these rules about third-party ownership. John Textor owned a share of Crystal Palace, which he's now agreed to sell. He owned a big stake in Lyon as well. He stepped back as the chairman of Lyon. He's resigned from the board. He's basically done everything possible to make sure that Lyon will play in the Europa League. It looks like he's been successful.
Right, staying in Europe, so a Spanish court has handed Brazil coach Carlo Ancelotti a 1-year prison sentence for failing to pay tax on his image rights revenues in 2014 when the Italian was Real Madrid head coach. Ancelotti was coached Real Madrid from 2013 to 2015, and then between 2021 and 2025 was cleared of a similar charge back in 2015 as the court could not prove that he stayed long enough in Spain to incur tax liabilities, the court added. Now, he moved to London after Real Madrid sacked him in May of 2015. Under Spanish law, any sentence under 2 years for a non-violent crime rarely requires a defendant without a previous conviction to serve jail time. The 66-year-old Carlo Ancelotti is the latest several soccer celebrities to be investigated and convicted by the Spanish tax authority for alleged tax fraud. Well, Tottenham Hotspur have agreed a $75 million fee with West Ham to sign midfielder Mohamed Kudus. The Ghanaian international is now said to have a medical before signing a long-term contract. BBC Sport reported on Saturday that the Hammers had rejected an initial $70 million fee, but a deal now has been clinched. Kudus, who has a $98 million release clause, joined West Ham in a $48 million deal from Ajax Amsterdam back in 2023. He made 65 appearances for the side, scoring about 13 goals and then providing 9 assists in the process. At least 6 top clubs have inquired about Kudus in recent weeks, but well-placed sources told BBC Sport the 24-year-old had prioritized a move to Tottenham Hotspur. And finally, back home, Barry Hendricks, the president of the South African Sports as well as Olympic Committee, has cited Tennis South Africa as an example of the challenges federations face in appointing a new CEO. He highlighted just how the organization has struggled to find a replacement since Andre Holman's departure back in 2023, also pointing to the complexities involving in hiring people as well as the financial implications tied to different funding models.
And you see, even with tennis, they went through one CEO. He did a fantastic job, and he left for a better job, I think, in America. They appointed another CEO from, I think it was rugby. He found a better job somewhere else, and now they're in a quandary as to who they can select. And it's all based on funding as well. You must remember, the funding from government has been decreasing, not increasing. And the political environment has become more difficult, more negative. But even more importantly, the economic environment has become more difficult.
All right, so that concludes your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Alternatively, give us a call, +27 11714 4459. More sporting updates tomorrow morning on Africa Rise and Shine. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
It is exactly 37 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. Now, SABC Sport brings you Chasing the Sun, a powerful 5-part documentary series about the Springboks, telling the rousing tale of their path to redemption and their ultimate World Cup glory in 2019. Starting from the 13th of July at 7:30 p.m. on SABC2, tune in every Sunday for the highs, the heartaches, and the heroics that made rugby history. Stream each episode and each chapter on SABC Plus, anytime, anywhere. And guess what? The best news is no subscription is needed. Don't miss Chasing the Sun, this Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC2. Be there when history happens.
Bringing the African markets into your home. Channel Africa, the African Perspective.
Now, today we have Zibusiso Mkwanazi, who is a co-founder of Avatar Advertising Agency. This is a feature we bring to you every single Thursday. It is our C-Suite exclusive. What a dynamic man he is. At the age of 17, he founded his advertising and marketing agency with just 2,000 Rand. That's about $112. His 20 years in the marketing industry have enabled him to lead a network of leading African marketing agencies in SADC and West Africa. Zibusiso Mkwanazi has just published a book on his entrepreneurial journey. Business by Grace is what it's titled, and he joins us live in studio. Good to have you with us, Zibusiso.
Good afternoon, Tammy. Thank you for the invite.
My goodness, I'm sure everybody's listening and thinking, he started at 17 and, you know, all of these decades later, he's managed to build, such a big business. But perhaps put it into context for us. You as Avatar have had quite a number of, blue chip I would call them blue chip
Yeah.
clients and accounts that you've worked on. Give us a little bit of a sneak preview about some of the highlights of your career.
Okay. Good afternoon to all the listeners too. So, the journey of Avatar started in 2012. So I was involved with other businesses, and then in 2012 it became Avatar. All of them led up to Avatar. And in this journey, we've worked with basically the market leaders across multiple industries. Notably, I think recently, the ABSA account, where we handle the advertising and marketing in South Africa. But our work goes out to a number of countries on the African continent. Companies like Tecno, right, which is a global smartphone manufacturing company. We've handled them across the African continent, as well as a number of continents, being Europe, being South America, in a number of emerging markets as well, around the globe. So we've worked the length and breadth of the country. I think at one time we ran a study that some of our work in a single year reaches over 1 billion people.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I was mentioning earlier on that one of your clients has been National Geographic.
Oh, yeah.
And how has
Old
that been
clients.
for you?
Yeah. In fact, as part of our global clients, Fox International Channels and National Geographic was the first one, and it was very interesting how we actually won that piece of business. The lady that used to run it at the time just saw, these guys with big dreams, and we were pushing very hard, and she just believed in us, and she gave us the account.
And how do you instill confidence? I mean, at that stage, as you mentioned, they were one of your first big global clients.
Yeah.
How do you instill confidence? How do you get a client of that nature and magnitude to say, you know what, I'm going to give these boys a chance?
Yeah. So at the time, or rather, let me phrase it in this way. What I've learned about business is that people are interested in one of two things, right? How do you help me make money, or how do you help me save money? Right? That's the universal rule of every business. And when you understand that, you get to understand their problems as well, and once you understand their problems, then what you do, how do you help them in that objective, and so we were able to phrase that for National Geographic in essence, being such a diverse brand that speaks to so many different people, as well as Fox, shows, in South Africa, you sell a show in this way. In West Africa, you sell it in this way. In East Africa, you sell it in this way. And because we're able to craft that solution, right, we're able to solve some very serious business problems on their behalf. And that's how we got the account.
I mean, your answer just really highlights your perspective and how you approach the clients. It's always about a solution for them. It's not so much about your business,
100%.
but it's about what you can do for them and the value that you're going to be adding to their particular business. And so that seems to be quite key in your approach. You've also worked in China.
Yes.
How was that experience for you, as far as just the dynamics, like a young African man just walking and working
in Shanghai?
In Shanghai, yeah.
Very interesting. Just the first and foremost is the language barrier that you first need to get through, and try and make out what is being said in calls, in meetings. I remember how we actually started working in China. So it was actually the techno business, and we got the opportunity to pitch, to the techno team in China, and this pitch was supposed to happen online. And we insisted that, no, we'll come to China, right? We want to pitch in person.
Wow.
Got on a plane, got there, right? And we were the only agency. I mean, then we were pitching against the top agencies in London, the top agencies in France, in America, basically the best in the world. But the one thing that made us stand out was it was an online pitch, but we said, no, we'll come. And just that one move, right, got them believing that actually these are the people that we want to work with.
You went the extra mile.
We went the extra mile. If you want to stand out, you need to do something different. Just don't be like the next person, right? And that's how we instilled confidence in an unknown agency in the Chinese world. And we were appointed.
And an African agency.
And an
at that.
African
And
agency.
an African agency. Let's get to your book, Business by Grace.
Yeah.
What led you to decide to actually pen your experiences into a book? Because it's not really just an autobiography.
Yeah.
It's not just a memoir, but it's
Yeah.
very much of a business tool and an A to Z, the ups
Yeah.
and downs
Yeah.
of business. You talk about making millions and losing
And
millions.
losing it all.
And then making it again.
So it was about my life story. My purpose is to make a positive difference in people's lives, and the book is an amplification of that purpose, right? So how can I reach as many people and make a positive difference? So this is not one of those books that is about a before and an after. What this book is about, it's about the story of resilience, right? Starting small and being resilient. It's facing the challenges as they come your direction. How do you maintain the course, right? And, what more powerful way is there? As Africans, we are storytellers. So telling my story, but also wrapping business lessons, strategy lessons, around, telling the story. Because then it becomes memorable, then it becomes
really
powerful, versus writing a textbook, But I think, stories have got the power, to change hearts, to change mindset,
You see it in color.
Exactly.
Literally, I still remember when I was reading your book, one of the places where my heart just sank and I felt so sad and just hurt, because I think, anybody who's been in business or has had any idea or something that is precious to them that they've built, when that is taken away from them, literally stolen from them, from under their feet, because of naivety or lack of experience or just contracts that are worded in ways that are tricky, and you just don't have, I guess, the wisdom at that time to be able to discern what was going on. Talk to us about that. It was earlier on in your career, you and your business partner had, built quite a sizable, a business, but you lost that.
I lost that. Yes. So I was very young. So I signed a deal that, in essence, without going into all the intricacies, led to, me losing my majority ownership of the business and becoming a minority owner of the business.
Your business.
My own business.
Your own, that you started in your mom's house, literally.
I was outsmarted.
You were outsmarted.
At the time. I was very young. I was 22, 23 years old, and sometimes people tend to take advantage of that, and I was taking, I fell into it and I lost it, and I lost it all, but what was very interesting is the lessons that come from that, right? Because then till this day, right, I will never forget that lesson.
I'm sure the contract
the devil is in the detail.
And there's no devil that's going to catch you unawares.
But that's the thing, because I was never trained formally in business at the time, right? So it meant that that's the only way you learn. You learn by doing the wrong things, but by through all those lessons, I've seemingly become much better.
Well, we certainly hope so, with an organization as big as Avatar that you're running now. So what do you hope Business by Grace will achieve for the budding entrepreneur, and even for a person who says, I am myself wherever I am? And this is one of the phrases that I like even for myself. I say, wherever I go, I take myself with me. Yeah. So you don't end up being a disjointed individual, depending on which context you are found.
Yeah.
And just reading your book, it seems like that's a principle that you yourself are ascribing to, that uniformity, that congruency in who you are and your identity, and marrying the essence of who you are, your being, with your work.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, I call it the foundation, right? In that for a long time, so before I found grace, and when I say I found grace, so before I built the business, I built this business just purely on transactional. It was just a very transactional thing. I want to make money, just like everyone else. I want to live a good life, etc., right? But in losing it all, right, that's where I found purpose, right? And in finding purpose, that I understood and through my journey with God, the the importance of spirituality in business in particular, and infusing it in how you do business. And that's in essence infusing myself and my newfound belief in my business journey. Now, yes,
go ahead, please.
Right. So now in this newfound journey, then it is now when I write the book, right, it's about, so whatever your dream may be, right, it's how do you link it to your purpose and what you are meant to be doing, right? And I'm hoping that the book almost, becomes a guide to finding that crucible moment, like how I found my crucible moment, right? And once you found that moment, how you can marry it to whatever your dreams may be, right? Because then it won't feel like you're working anymore. It will feel like, actually, now I'm doing something I ought to be doing, right? And that's how you truly become successful at it.
There's a book I remember that I read many, many years ago. Can't remember the author, but his name was Nick somebody.
Okay.
And the book was titled The Work You Were Born to Do.
Wow.
And literally that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's about the work you were born to do, what your gifts are, what your talents are, the contribution that you're here to make to mankind, to industries, to humanity, and walking as your being through your life.
Yeah. I mean, let's think about this, right? The one thing you cannot fail at is being yourself.
Right.
It's the most natural thing to us, right? So being your natural self and your spiritual self and infusing it into a purpose, and an idea, a big idea, right? You naturally are more likely to succeed at it.
What I love is you literally a case study of the fact that it is possible.
Yeah.
That you don't have to be disjointed. You don't have to have a game face and a you face. You can be you, and your game face can be you.
Yeah.
And there doesn't have to be like a chasm between the two. Sibusiso Mkhwanazi, absolutely awesome speaking with you and hosting you on the C-Suite today. His book is available. I'm sure you can find it absolutely everywhere, right?
It's in bookshops. We've got a website, mkhwanazi.co.za, so you can buy it online, but yeah.
And it's titled Business by Grace. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your inspiring story and your walk with grace and your walk with business.
Thank you.
That's Sibusiso Mkhwanazi taking us to exactly 4:52 Central African Time.
Bringing the African markets into your home. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
South African Reserve Bank says that despite ongoing economic uncertainty, South Africa's financial sector continues to show resilience. However, the bank warns that a challenging macroeconomic and geopolitical landscape calls for heightened vigilance from financial sector supervisors. This was highlighted during a media breakfast hosted by the Reserve Bank and the Prudential Authority following the release of the organization's 2024-2025 annual report. Channel Africa reporter Innocent Simosa has more.
The 2024-2025 annual report highlights the Prudential Authority's extensive supervisory work across South Africa's financial institutions. Deputy Governor of the South African Reserve Bank and CEO of the Prudential Authority, Fundi Chazibana, says as banks continue to reduce their physical presence, the Reserve Bank is intensifying its oversight to respond to emerging risks, particularly in the area of cybersecurity.
We don't tell you what to do. We ask you questions. Are you aware of the risks that you are now exposing yourself to? And are you able to manage them? So I'm going to talk about two very quickly and then hand over. So as you digitize, there would be potentially closure of branches, not necessarily in our forte.
Chadzibana says the South African Reserve Bank plays a key role in overseeing the governance and security of the digital financial platforms.
Is if now all of us are banking through our phones and there is a system outage, we would ask very different questions about the system outage as the PA relative to the FSCA. The FSCA would ask about you and I, the fact that we cannot bank. we would be asking about system integrity issue and what has happened on the prudential side, on the safety, because remember, you've now are using a new tool and you've got to understand the implications of it for your business.
Faisal Jina, head of the Risk Support Department at the Prudential Authority, shared insights on the impact of emerging risks and how they are being closely monitored.
And to the extent our unemployment is very high, consumers are experiencing strain, and that has an impact on particular lending institutions, but also on insurers in terms of lapse risk and policies being surrendered or just policy just lapsing. Some of the other things that we look at, they are linked. I mean, with the low growth story is also this issue around infrastructure, security, what impact. So it kind of loops back to the low growth story in terms of, is our rail infrastructure good enough? Things like water, power, those type of things, in terms of what impact does it actually have on growth? Because ultimately it has a knock-on impact overall.
And these are the focus areas.
From a lending perspective, I can put it this way. We've seen, or more recently, lending go towards the corporate sector, but also towards the sovereign, and less so because institutions have less appetite because of the creditworthiness of retail clients potentially. As I mentioned earlier, retail customers are under a bit of pressure. So in terms of how those funds are being channeled, both to corporates but also to the sovereign, we also monitor that risk quite carefully because it has implications for the broader financial sector.
One of the key risk factors highlighted is the tariffs imposed on South Africa by US President Donald Trump. However, there is still hope that negotiations could ease trade tensions. For Channel Africa News, I am Innocent Simosa in Johannesburg.
Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It has gone exactly 4:56 Central African time, and that's how we come to the end of Africa in Business for today. But before that, bonjour to you, Joelle. She's coming up with Vuesd Afrique in just a moment.
Bonjour Tami, bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Sur Vuesd Afrique, il sera question du rapport d'Oxfam publié ce jeudi. 4 des milliardaires les plus riches d'Afrique détiennent la richesse combinée de la moitié de la population en Afrique. On parlera également des autorités togolaises qui émettent certains mandats, mais aussi pour les grands titres du Cameroun. La polémique enfle de nouveau sur une éventuelle candidature de Paul Biya. C'est tout à l'heure sur Vuesd Afrique. Merci de rester connecté. Merci Tami.
Merci beaucoup Joelle. C'est Joelle with Vuesd Afrique coming up from 5 p.m. Central African time. To our producer Mabo Bulok, our technical operator Ndandolo Tuli, and on social media Nzako Mashaba, I am Tami Ngubeni. This has been Africa in Business on Channel Africa. À demain, tout à l'heure.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge aka Binal Export depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. participation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Africa's very own think tank. This is Channel Africa Online. www.channelafrica.co.za.
Vuesd Afrique, un magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi avec Joelle Muteba sur Channel Africa de 15h à 16h, temps universel. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.